Far away from the Earth we know, beyond stars that most people will never see, there was a world quietly dying. It was not a sudden disaster, not a fiery end, but a slow fading away. Generations had lived with the same fear, the same question whispered among themselves. Would they survive another year, another decade, another century? The Illyrians, as they were called in their own tongue, had once thrived. Their planet was green and full of rivers that ran endlessly across the valleys. Their cities were tall and proud, built with skill and patience. For centuries they had told stories of progress and discovery, of music and beauty that filled their homes. But none of those stories could stop the star above them from changing. Their sun, once golden and warm, had begun to dim. Slowly at first, so slowly that only their most careful scientists noticed. But with time, the change could be seen by every farmer in the fields, every child looking up at the night sky. The warmth that had given life to their crops was no longer enough. The seasons grew colder and the harvests shrank. The Illyrians tried to fight it. They built machines to draw energy from deep within the planet's crust. They learned how to grow food in towers filled with artificial light. They stored what little they could, planning for winters that never seemed to end. But no matter how much they tried, the truth grew harder to ignore. Their world was slipping away. The old ones spoke in hushed voices about the past, about how once the Illyrians had reached out into the stars. They had built ships that touched the edge of their system, leaving messages scattered like bottles in a vast ocean. But the Illyrians had grown weary of exploration. They had turned inward, focusing on their planet, forgetting the wider universe. Now, as their sun faltered, those long-forgotten signals were their only hope. They tried again. With trembling hands, their last engineers reactivated ancient transmitters. The signals they sent were desperate but full of dignity. They did not beg for conquest or wealth. They simply asked, "Is anyone listening?" The signals crossed the galaxy. Years became decades, decades became centuries. The Illyrians grew older, weaker, smaller in number. They told their children that somewhere out there, perhaps, a kind hand might reach across the stars. But as generations passed with no answer, hope turned into silence. Families learned to live with less. A single piece of fruit was divided among many. The weak often gave their share to the young, believing the children deserved at least one more chance. In homes built from crumbling stone, laughter was rare. Still, sometimes around dim fires, they told stories of the stars. They told their little ones that there were worlds where the sun never faded, where rivers still sparkled and food grew freely. One day, they whispered, "We will see them." But deep down, the elders knew the truth. The signals had gone out, yes, but the galaxy was vast and uncaring. Civilizations rose and fell like sparks in a storm. Who would hear them? Who would care for a dying people so far away from everything? The silence became part of their lives. Each time the great transmitter crackled, the Illyrians leaned close, waiting for a reply. Each time there was nothing but static. That silence cut deeper than hunger. It told them they were truly alone. Children born in that age grew up not with dreams of the stars, but with the burden of survival. They learned not how to build ships, but how to make one piece of bread last for 2 days. They learned how to walk carefully on thin ground where the planet's warmth had already escaped. Some never saw the sun shine fully in their lifetimes, and yet strangely life clung on. A mother would cradle her child, whispering comfort even if she herself had eaten nothing. A craftsman would carve patterns on stone walls, though no one could afford beauty anymore. Teachers still gathered children and spoke of history, though their voices sometimes shook with weakness. There was something unbreakable in them, a small flame that refused to die. On cold nights, when the winds swept across empty streets, many Illyrians would look up at the sky. The stars were sharp and clear against the darkness. Some cursed them, asking why none had answered. Others prayed, though they no longer knew to whom, and a very few, still believed. Belief was fragile, but it kept them moving. If no one was coming, why build the transmitters again and again? Why continue to send messages when silence was the only reply? Still, they did it. Every cycle, they repaired the ancient machines, lit them up with the last of their power, and sent a call. The message was simple. We are here. We need help. The younger ones often asked, "Who are we calling to?" The elders would answer softly, "To anyone who will listen. To anyone who has a heart." Time passed. Entire villages crumbled. Forests thinned and rivers dried. The Illyrians could barely recognize their once beautiful world. It was not just their bodies that were hungry, it was their spirits. To be forgotten was worse than to starve, and yet in the heart of every story they told, one truth remained. They would not stop calling. Even if the universe had abandoned them, they would keep their voices alive, if only to prove they had once existed, unseen by them. Those faint signals, weak and nearly broken by the distance, drifted endlessly through the galaxy. They crossed empty voids, past stars, slipped by planets where no one listened. For most, they were nothing more than background noise. But they continued. That was the quiet miracle. Their voices had not been silenced. And so the Illyrians endured, not knowing if anyone would ever step forward. They were a people living on the edge of extinction, carrying both sorrow and stubborn hope. Forsaken across the galaxy, they still waited, not for conquerors, not for traitors, but for kindness. They did not know it yet, but far away those faint signals had reached new ears, and in time someone would answer. It was an ordinary day in the vastness of space, or at least it seemed that way. A research vessel from Earth drifted quietly through the darkness, its crew busy with their usual work. They were not explorers chasing glory. They were scientists, engineers, and dreamers searching for small pieces of knowledge. They measured radiation, studied particles, and listened to the background hum of the universe. For them, the stars were not only beautiful, they were books filled with secrets waiting to be read. On one of those quiet shifts, a technician sat at the console, half distracted, half focused, as signals from distant corners of the sky flowed through the system. Most of the sounds were meaningless, just static, random bursts from natural forces. The crew was used to hearing them, but suddenly among the noise there was something different, a strange rhythm, a faint pattern that did not belong to the usual whispers of the cosmos. It was almost too weak to notice, yet it was there, like a single voice trying to break through the roar of a storm. At first, the technician thought it was just interference, maybe a reflection of their own signals bouncing back. But the more he listened, the more he realized this was no accident. The signal repeated itself again and again with a deliberate structure. It was not nature. It was not random. Someone had built it. Someone had sent it. He called the others, and soon the quiet room filled with people leaning over screens, adjusting dials, running calculations. Their faces lit up with the kind of wonder that children feel when they first see the stars. They had trained all their lives for a discovery like this, but none of them had truly believed it would come on such an ordinary day. As the signal grew clearer through their equipment, fragments of meaning began to appear. The message was old, broken, but still carried enough weight to be understood. It was a plea, a call for help. Somewhere, far beyond Earth's reach, a civilization had been crying out, and they had been crying out for centuries. The room fell silent. No one spoke for a long while, because the reality of it pressed down on them like the gravity of a great planet. These were not abstract beings in theory books. They were real. They were alive, or at least they had been alive when the message was sent. Some felt excitement, a chance to make history, to meet another intelligence, to answer the question humanity had carried for ages: are we alone? But others felt something heavier. If the message was that old, what if it was too late? What if the voices that sent it were already gone? The thought was painful, but still the signal pulsed steadily on the screens, refusing to be ignored. The captain of the vessel gathered the crew. They debated what to do. Some argued they should record the discovery, send it back to Earth, and let the leaders decide. Others said waiting would be a mistake. What if there was still time? What if lives could be saved? After hours of discussion, one truth became clear. Humanity could not turn its back on this. For centuries, Earth had known the meaning of struggle. Wars, disasters, hunger. Humans had carried scars across generations. They knew what it felt like to cry for help and be met with silence. And perhaps that was why, in that moment, they could not ignore a distant civilization's suffering. The coordinates hidden in the signal were calculated. The journey would not be easy. The path lay through unstable regions of space, dangerous to navigate. Resources would be stretched thin. Yet despite the risks, the decision was made. Humanity would go. Not because of riches, not because of conquest, but because compassion demanded it. Word of the discovery spread back to Earth. When the message reached the ground, people everywhere reacted with awe. Governments debated in their halls. Scientists argued in conferences, and ordinary people whispered in cafes and living rooms. Some feared it. Why should we get involved? They asked. It's too far, too costly, too uncertain. Others looked at the stars with tears in their eyes and said, if we don't help, who will? It was not an easy choice. Missions were expensive, dangerous, and uncertain. There were endless voices warning against wasting time on strangers. But slowly the tide began to shift. For all their differences, humanity shared one thing: the memory of being vulnerable. The thought of leaving a civilization to die in silence struck a chord too deep to ignore. Preparations began. Ships were readied, supplies gathered, engineers worked day and night to strengthen vessels for a journey longer than any before. There were setbacks, failures, even accidents. But each obstacle was faced with determination. This was not just a mission. It had become a promise to answer the call that the galaxy itself had ignored. Among the crews selected for the mission were people from all walks of life. Scientists eager to learn, doctors ready to heal, builders prepared to repair, and simple volunteers willing to give their hands and hearts to the cause. They were not soldiers. They were not conquerors. They were, above all, human beings. When the day came for launch, crowds gathered to watch. Millions stared at the sky, knowing history was about to turn. Children clutched the hands of their parents, asking questions about who these faraway people were. Some whispered prayers, others simply watched in silence. The rockets ignited, and humanity's fleet rose from Earth with a trail of fire, carrying with it the weight of hope. Inside the ships, the crew stared out at the stars. Some felt fear, how could they not? But more than fear, they felt a strange sense of connection. Out there, across the endless dark, people waited. People who had once looked at their own night sky, wondering if anyone would hear them. The voyage stretched on. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. The silence of space was endless, but the signal continued to guide them, faint but steady. At times, doubt crept in. What if they arrived too late? What if the world they were racing toward was already empty? But still they pressed forward, because turning back was no longer possible. It was no longer about discovery. It was about responsibility. Humanity had been given a chance to prove who they truly were, not just to themselves, but to the galaxy. Were they another species that looked away from suffering? Or would they be the ones who stepped in when no one else would? As the ships drew nearer to their destination, the signal grew clearer. It was weak, broken, but still repeating. Each time it played, the crew listened in silence. The words were not in human language, yet the meaning was unmistakable. We are here. We need help. For those on board, the message was no longer from strangers. It was from neighbors they had never met, voices that had become part of their own hearts. The silence of the galaxy had been broken, and humanity had answered. They did not know what awaited them. They did not know if they would be greeted with suspicion, gratitude, or sorrow. But they knew one thing: the Illyrians would no longer be alone. And in that promise, hope burned brighter than any star. The long journey through the endless black finally came to an end. After months of silence, calculations, and cautious navigation, the human fleet approached the coordinates carried by the old signal. At first they saw nothing unusual, just another system, another star faintly glowing in the dark. But as the ships drew closer, the truth became clear. The star was weak, dim, giving off only a pale light. Around it circled a single planet, battered, worn down, and almost lifeless. It was not the shining world many had imagined. It looked tired, as if even the planet itself had given up. Large cracks cut across its surface, its oceans had shrunk into patches, and the once green land was dry and pale. The crew looked out from the observation decks, their voices hushed. It was not just a planet. They knew people had lived there, families, children, entire generations waiting for help. Now they could only wonder if anyone remained. The ships entered orbit carefully. Instruments scanned for signs of life. For long moments there was nothing but silence. Then suddenly faint readings appeared. Small clusters of warmth, weak signals of energy, movement that could only mean one thing: there were still survivors. The crew felt their hearts rise. Against all odds, the people of this world had endured. As the ship circled, the humans sent out a greeting, their first attempt at communication. A beam of light carried a simple message: "We come in peace. We have heard your call." They repeated it again and again in different frequencies, hoping one would be understood. Down below, in the broken cities of the Illyrians, the sudden burst of light in the sky did not go unnoticed. For centuries they had watched their skies in silence, hoping for a sign. Many had long stopped believing, but now, for the first time in living memory, the heavens answered. At first, fear spread. Some whispered that invaders had come at last to claim what little remained. Others fell to their knees, thinking it was the return of long-lost gods. But amid the fear, a fragile hope grew. Could this be the answer to their endless prayers? In a ruined city near one of the last great transmitters, a group of Illyrians gathered on rooftops to watch the strange lights above. They were thin, their faces marked by hunger, but their eyes shone as they pointed to the sky. For the first time, the stars did not feel cold. The humans prepared for landing. Their ships touched down gently on the surface, sending up clouds of dust. The air was thin but breathable. As the hatches opened, the first humans stepped onto alien soil. They carried no weapons, only supplies, food containers, and medical kits. Their hearts beat fast. No one knew how the Illyrians would react. The first meeting was cautious. The Illyrians approached slowly, their figures tall but frail, their clothes patched and worn. Their eyes studied the humans with suspicion and wonder. They spoke in a language unfamiliar, but the meaning of their expressions was clear. Fear mixed with desperate hope. The humans made no sudden moves. They set down containers of food, opened them, and showed how to eat it. They poured clean water into bowls and stepped back, waiting. For a long while, no one moved. Then a small Illyrian child stepped forward. Thin and trembling, the child reached out and tasted the food. His eyes widened, and he called out to the others. That moment broke the silence. Slowly, carefully, the Illyrians accepted the gifts. They ate, drank, and for the first time in many years, their bodies felt strength return. Tears welled in their eyes. Some reached out to touch the humans' hands as if to make sure they were real. The days that followed were filled with both hope and tension. The humans worked tirelessly, setting up shelters, distributing supplies, and helping repair what they could. The Illyrians watched them closely, still unsure of their true intentions. Some elders warned their people not to trust too quickly. They had been abandoned by the galaxy for so long. Why should they believe these newcomers were different? But trust, like the first spark of fire, began to grow. Human doctors treated Illyrians who had grown sick from hunger. Engineers helped restart broken machines, bringing light to places that had been dark for decades. Every small act carried a message louder than words. We came not to take, but to give. Still, misunderstandings were inevitable. The languages were different, the customs unfamiliar. There were moments of confusion, even suspicion. But each time, patience and kindness built a bridge. When Illyrians saw humans working side by side with them, sweating, lifting, sharing meals, something shifted deep in their hearts. They realized these visitors did not see them as broken or lost. They saw them as equals. One night, under the pale light of their dying sun, a group of Illyrians gathered with the humans around a fire. Though they could not speak the same words, they shared gestures, smiles, and stories told with hands and eyes. An old Illyrian took a piece of broken stone and carved a simple picture in the dirt. A star, a planet, and two figures holding hands. The humans understood, and one of them drew the same beside it. Laughter broke out, soft and uncertain at first, then strong and warm. For the first time in centuries, joy returned to the Illyrians. Children followed the humans everywhere, curious about their strange clothes, their tools, their accents. The crew let them play with harmless gadgets, and the sound of laughter filled streets that had known only silence. Mothers wept quietly, seeing their children smile again. Fathers stood in awe, realizing their families might have a future after all. The humans, too, were changed. They had come expecting to offer help, but they found themselves learning. The Illyrians taught them songs that had survived generations, melodies of sorrow and hope. They showed them carvings and patterns etched into stone walls, the only reminders of a once great culture. The humans realized these people were not just survivors, they were guardians of a history that deserved to live on. As days turned into weeks, trust grew stronger. The Illyrians no longer looked at the sky with despair. They looked at the humans and saw proof that compassion still existed in the universe. They began to believe that their children would not have to grow up in ruins, that their world could shine again. But deep inside, both sides knew this was only the beginning. The planet was still dying. The sun was still fading. Food and water were still scarce. The supplies the humans had brought were precious, but they were not endless. A greater challenge lay ahead, saving an entire civilization from extinction. For now, though, it was enough to know they were not alone. After centuries of silence, the Illyrians had been answered. Their message had crossed the galaxy and found not conquerors, not scavengers, but human beings who chose to step in. And under the pale glow of their fading sun, two different species shared the same fire, the same food, and the same hope. The first days after contact had been filled with hope, but reality returned quickly. The humans had brought food, medicine, and tools, but everyone knew it was not enough to save an entire civilization. The Illyrian world was still in deep trouble. Their sun was weakening faster than expected. The soil was barren, the rivers almost dry. What the humans had provided gave relief, but only for a short time. The real challenge was survival in the long run. The crews worked day and night, repairing broken machines and trying to restart the old Illyrian systems that had been silent for decades. The Illyrians watched in amazement as human engineers climbed through ruins, reconnecting wires and using strange tools that sparked with light. Slowly, parts of the old cities lit up again. For the first time in years, streets glowed in the dark and families gathered beneath the faint lights, whispering in awe. But the work was dangerous. The planet's storms were violent, filled with radiation bursts that interfered with machines. Several times, human ships were damaged trying to deliver supplies to remote villages. In one case, a shuttle was forced to land in a canyon when its engines failed. The crew survived, but only because Illyrians nearby rushed to help, carrying the humans back to safety even though they themselves were weak and hungry. It was in moments like these that trust deepened, when both sides risked their lives for each other. The Illyrians were not used to seeing outsiders sacrifice for them. At first, some could not believe it. They whispered that humans must have hidden motives, that no one gives so much without expecting something in return. But slowly those doubts began to break. They saw human doctors refusing to sleep so they could care for sick children. They saw volunteers sharing their own food with families who had none. They saw builders standing in freezing winds to fix homes for people they had just met. Sacrifice, however, came with a price. The journey through dangerous space had already claimed some lives, and now, on the Illyrian world, the risks continued. Accidents happened. Some volunteers were lost while transporting heavy supplies across unstable ground. Others fell ill from exposure to the planet's thin, damaged air. Each time it happened, grief spread among both humans and Illyrians. But instead of breaking their spirit, it made them more determined. Every loss became a reminder of how important the mission was. Not all Illyrians welcomed help. Some groups believed their people should solve their own problems without outsiders. They accused the humans of interference, of trying to control them. There were heated debates in the gathering halls, voices raised in anger. The humans did not respond with force. Instead, they listened patiently, explaining again and again that they had not come to rule or to take, only to help. Over time, even the most suspicious Illyrians could not deny the truth. They saw their neighbors healed, their homes rebuilt, their children laughing again. Slowly, resistance softened. The hardest challenge was food. The Illyrian soil had lost its strength, crops barely grew, and most of their stored supplies had long since vanished. The humans brought advanced equipment, portable greenhouses, seeds resistant to poor soil, and machines that used light to grow plants without the sun. But even with this technology, the results were slow. Hunger remained the greatest enemy. There were nights when the humans gathered in private looking over their numbers and realizing they could not feed everyone. They had to make difficult choices. Who would get food first, which villages to visit, which systems to repair? These choices weighed heavily on them. They knew that every decision meant life for some and continued struggle for others. The Illyrians noticed the burden on their faces. That was when many of them began to step forward, offering to help with the work instead of just waiting for aid. Farmers, though weak, taught humans how their crops once grew. Craftsmen showed how to rebuild tools using local resources. Even children carried water, gathered materials, and helped however they could. The mission was no longer humans saving Illyrians. It became a partnership. Both sides learned that survival required working together. Amid these struggles, there were also moments of quiet beauty. A human and an Illyrian working side by side would share stories, using drawings and gestures to cross the language barrier. They discovered they laughed at similar things, cried for similar reasons, and dreamed of similar hopes. Around campfires, Illyrian songs blended with human voices, creating music that had never been heard before. Each note carried the weight of sacrifice but also the joy of connection. Still, dangers never ended. The planet's unstable climate produced sudden storms that tore through settlements. In one storm, an entire shelter collapsed, trapping both humans and Illyrians beneath the rubble. Rescue teams worked for hours in the freezing rain, pulling survivors out with bleeding hands. Everyone was saved, but the memory stayed with them, a reminder of how fragile life was on this world. The mission stretched the humans to their limits. Supplies ran low, and Earth could not send reinforcements quickly. Some volunteers grew sick, their bodies weakened by exhaustion. Others began to question whether they could really save an entire world. But each time despair crept in, they remembered the faces of the Illyrians, the children smiling, the families gathering around lighted homes, the elders whispering prayers of gratitude. Those faces gave them strength to continue. Sacrifices also came from the Illyrians. Some of them refused food so that younger ones could eat. Others offered their homes to house human volunteers, even though space was already tight. Elders who were too weak to work still found ways to contribute, teaching humans about Illyrian culture, songs, and traditions. In their own way, they too gave everything they had left. Through all these struggles, a bond stronger than any treaty was formed. Humanity and the Illyrians began to see each other not as strangers, but as family. Each act of sacrifice was a thread, and together those threads wove a connection that no storm could break. Yet as weeks turned to months, one truth could not be ignored. The Illyrian planet was still dying. Even with all the repairs, all the greenhouses, all the shared effort, the fading sun continued its slow collapse. The humans knew they could not stop a star from dying. That reality weighed heavily on them. The Illyrians also knew. They looked at their sky each night and saw the pale glow weaker than before. But this time they did not face the fear alone. They had friends beside them, people who had crossed the stars to stand with them, and that made all the difference. When humans lost one of their own during a dangerous mission, the Illyrians built a small memorial stone. They carved symbols of unity into it, and families gathered to place flowers at its base. When Illyrians passed away, humans stood beside their grieving families, holding their hands in silence. In sorrow, they were united. In sacrifice, they were equal. The struggle was far from over. Everyone knew the hardest decision still lay ahead. Could they find a way to move the Illyrians to safety? Could they build habitats beyond the planet? No one had the answers yet. But for now, both species carried the same belief, that compassion was stronger than despair. The Illyrians had once thought they were forsaken, abandoned by the galaxy. But now, as they looked at the humans working tirelessly among them, they realized something had changed. They were no longer alone in their struggle. Humanity had stepped in, not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as companions willing to share every hardship. And in that bond, both found a new kind of strength, the strength to keep fighting, no matter the cost. The Illyrian world had changed. It was still scarred, still fragile, but there was something new in the air, hope. Where once the streets were silent, now voices could be heard. Where once families sat in the dark, now lamps glowed softly at night. Where once children looked at the sky with fear, now they pointed with wonder at the ships above. Yet no one pretended the danger had passed. The sun continued to fade, casting weaker light each day. Everyone knew the truth. The planet could not last forever. But instead of despair, there was determination. For the first time in centuries, the Illyrians had partners, people who had crossed the galaxy to stand with them. Humanity had given them more than food and machines. They had given them time, a chance to imagine a future. The question was, what kind of future? The humans worked with Illyrian leaders and elders, gathering in makeshift halls to plan. They could not save the sun, but they could save the people. Ideas filled the air, building great orbital stations around the planet, creating ships to carry families to safer worlds, or constructing jump gates that would link Illyria to other parts of the galaxy. Each plan carried risks, each one demanded sacrifice, but no one dismissed them. For the first time, hope was stronger than fear. The Illyrians themselves began to step forward with courage. For generations, they had lived as survivors, clinging to what little remained. Now they began to dream again. Young people offered to train with the humans, learning how to build, fly, and heal. Elders shared ancient knowledge, recalling old star maps and designs from the days when their people once explored the stars. Together, human and Illyrian minds worked side by side, sketching blueprints for a tomorrow that had once seemed impossible. It was not easy. The projects required resources Earth could barely provide. The distance was great and every supply mission came at a heavy cost. But when news spread across human colonies and settlements, people stepped forward. Donations, volunteers, entire crews offered to join the mission. Humanity, once divided by so many things, found unity in a simple truth. If they could save another civilization, then compassion was worth more than fear. The Illyrians watched in awe as more ships arrived, carrying not soldiers but builders and teachers. Together they built the first great orbital habitat, a station where Illyrians could live above their dying world, safe from storms and famine. It was a massive effort. Humans risked their lives in the vacuum of space, attaching giant panels while Illyrians carried supplies and worked on the interior. For weeks the station grew piece by piece, a symbol of unity hanging like a jewel above the planet. When the first Illyrian families moved into the habitat, tears filled their eyes. For generations their people had feared extinction. Now, as they looked out of wide windows at the stars, they realized they had a future among them. Children pressed their hands to the glass, pointing at distant lights, no longer symbols of silence but of possibility. But the journey was not only about technology. The humans had brought something else, a reminder of dignity. They did not treat the Illyrians as helpless but as partners. Every decision was made together. Every risk was shared. This respect healed wounds deeper than hunger or thirst. It restored the Illyrian sense of worth. There were still struggles. Some feared leaving their planet, their home. They asked, "If we leave, who will remember our soil, our rivers, our songs?" Humanity answered not with words, but with actions. They helped record Illyrian stories, carving them into data crystals and books that would last for centuries. They preserved artifacts, songs, and even planted Illyrian seeds in human-controlled greenhouses. Nothing would be forgotten. One day, as the great habitat shone above and more projects began, a gathering was held in the largest Illyrian city still standing. Humans and Illyrians stood together in a wide square. It was not a celebration of victory, because the struggle was not finished, but a celebration of unity. Speeches were given, translated slowly into both languages. An Illyrian elder, his voice weak but steady, spoke words that touched everyone present. For centuries we called into the dark, and the dark gave us nothing. We believed we were alone, forgotten. But then you came. You gave us food, yes, and shelter, yes. But more than that, you gave us a hand when all others turned away. You gave us proof that kindness is not an illusion. For that we are no longer forsaken. We are family. The crowd, human and Illyrian alike, fell silent, many with tears in their eyes. Then applause and cheers rose into the sky. For a moment it felt as if the entire planet itself breathed with new life. The work continued. New habitats were built, plans for interstellar relocation were drawn, and slowly the Illyrians prepared for the future beyond their failing world. It was not quick, and it was not without pain. Some still passed away before help could reach them. Some projects failed, costing precious time. But each setback was faced together. No one was left to struggle alone. What began as a rescue became something greater. Humanity realized they were not just saving the Illyrians, they were reshaping the galaxy's story. Other civilizations began to notice. Across distant systems, whispers spread. Humanity had done what no one else dared. They had answered the call of the Forsaken. They had proven that compassion could travel farther than any starship. For the Illyrians, the memory of despair slowly gave way to something brighter. Children grew up in habitats filled with gardens and light, hearing stories of the time when their people were saved. They were taught not only Illyrian history but human history as well. They learned that kindness was not bound to one world or one species. It was something greater, something that bound the galaxy together. The humans, too, were changed. They returned home carrying songs in Illyrian voices, carvings made by Illyrian hands, and friendships that would last for generations. Their own people looked at them with pride, knowing they had written a chapter of history that would never be forgotten. Years later, when the Illyrians finally stepped onto new worlds, green, full of life, they planted their first seeds in the soil and whispered a promise to the stars. They promised never to forget the hands that reached out to them, never to ignore the cries of others in need. The galaxy had once turned away, leaving them to suffer. But humanity had stepped in. And because of that, the Illyrians lived, thrived, and found a new dawn. The story spread far beyond their worlds. It was told in human schools, Illyrian temples, and on distant colonies that had only heard whispers of it. It carried a single message that could not be ignored. Compassion is stronger than silence, and when one people steps forward for another, hope can cross even the emptiest void. And so, under the light of new suns, two civilizations stood together, not as savior and saved, not as stranger and guest, but as equals. What began as a cry in the darkness had become a song of unity, echoing across the stars. The Illyrians would never again be called forsaken. For when their world was failing, when the galaxy had turned away, one truth had been written in history. Humanity stepped in.